For those who are new to Emerson and for our members who have very short memories, let me provide the context for this morning's sermon. From August to December of 2015, just a few short months ago, I was generously provided a 5-month sabbatical, which I spent in Mexico City. This morning's sermon is my third sermon, coming directly from my sabbatical experiences. The first sermon was about the Quakers, whom I came to deeply appreciate in Mexico City. If you don't know, I lived in Casa De Los Amigos, the house of friends, and friends is another word for Quakers, and so I was really involved deeply in a Quaker community. The second sermon was about nonviolent communication, which I taught while in Mexico in Spanish. I taught it in Spanish. And that title of my second sermon, that second sabbatical sermon, Peace Begins in the Heart, has become my motto for a life well lived. Today's sermon about refugees and immigrants come directly from the daily work that we did at Casa De Los Amigos, a hospitality house in the middle of Mexico City with space for up to 40 overnight guests, and with some of that space dedicated to serving refugees in Mexico. Let me begin by distinguishing between immigrants and refugees, or between migrants and refugees. Migrants are people who choose to resettle to another country in search of a better life. And if you could look in my notes, you would see that the word choose is in quotes, because this is in itself a very complicated topic. And it's not my topic this morning, but I've preached on this topic before. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her home country because of armed conflict or persecution. When I speak of the refugees we served at Casa De Los Amigos, I'm speaking about individuals from other countries who are seeking to live permanently in Mexico. This morning, I will speak primarily about refugees, but with some information about migrants as well. Casa De Los Amigos has a long history of involvement in serving the needs of the refugees in Mexico. In the 1980s, they were the first in Mexico City to welcome those fleeing the armed conflicts, the civil wars, the dirty wars, we sometimes call them, in Central America. They did this by offering housing and maintaining active links with job boards, doctors and clinics, psychologists, opticians, schools, housing options, lawyers, and sources of clothing, shoes, furniture, and so much more. But here is the challenge they faced. With hearts that truly wanted to serve refugees in need, they were eventually overwhelmed by the magnitude and complexity of those needs. Refugees arrive with no systems of support. They arrive traumatized. They arrived with no clear plan forward other than to flee persecution. When the guest house was dominated with people in various states of crisis with no clear goals, it began to negatively impact Casa De Los Amigos. By 1995, Casa De Los Amigos withdrew completely and was no longer providing services to refugees. In the late 1990s and the early 2000s, Casa De Los Amigos was having its own institutional crisis caused by a variety of factors. By 2006, though, they took a hard look. Casa De Los Amigos took a hard look at itself. They assessed what their strengths were, what they had uniquely to offer, and they began again to serve refugees while being very intentional about the role they would play. One of the most critical changes was that Casa De Los Amigos would work within a network of organizations that were providing support to the refugees who were coming to Mexico. Each organization in the network had a clear understanding of the role they played. One organization in the network would do an evaluation of the refugees to determine what types of support they needed and would help the refugee create a plan going forward. Another organization in the network would provide psychological support, and another was responsible for securing and providing financial assistance. What I found most meaningful and heartwarming was the unique role that Casa de los Amigos played. And here I will start using the word we, because I felt that I was part of what we called supportive housing. So what is meant by supportive housing? The role that Casa de los Amigos played. First of all, it means that we are more than just a place to stay. Casa de los Amigos took pride that we were a community. Refugees eat breakfast for free, cooked by the volunteers, and we, including all of the other guests, would eat around a large table, home style, if you will. There were evening programs like yoga, and each Sunday evening we had a potluck dinner together. And once a month we showed a movie, just to mention a few of the programs at Casa de los Amigos. And for the refugees, most of whom did not speak English or Spanish, we offered Spanish classes. What is more, with 5 to 7 full-time volunteers who lived at La Casa, Casa de los Amigos, we developed relationships with the refugees. And when needed, and it was needed often, the volunteers would escort refugees to their meetings, to doctor's appointments, and to look for more permanent housing options when the time was right. We celebrated cultural events like Dia de los Muertos. We held a posada at Christmas. And when we sang Christmas carols, we invited many others in the local community, and more than 100 attended. And we broke piñatas on a number of occasions. This is the community, the cultural acclamation that we provided. So yes, Casa de los Amigos was much more than a place to stay. I'm frequently asked, how did the refugees get to Mexico in the first place? Almost all Africans or Middle Easterns at Casa de los Amigos come to Mexico on their own and were either detained there or encountered the government refugee agency or the United Nations via a migrant house, a jail, a hospital, some other organization, or any number of ways. They would then they chose to solicit asylum in Mexico, explaining their case and asking for asylum in Mexico. It is after that they made application for asylum that they might be referred to a network partner and ultimately to Casa de los Amigos, where their application for refugee status was being processed, or while it was being processed. This morning I want to briefly tell some of the stories of the refugees we served. And please keep in mind that I know very little because we didn't pry into what is a very private and traumatic life. I'm going to remove key identifying information in the stories that I'm going to tell. And yet, just to make sure that I don't inadvertently say something that might reveal their identity or put them at risk, I'm going to ask that we turn off the video camera this morning. Let me know when you're ready. Again, I tell you these stories so we can begin to understand the complex and traumatic lives that refugees have. Trauma that you and I may understand intellectually, but unless we have suffered significant trauma in ourselves, we will never fully understand the seriousness of what has happened to these individuals. It may seem like Casa de los Amigos only supported refugees and did not support migrants, but that's not the case. For a couple of weeks, we hosted a family of 3 who were seeking asylum in the United States because of threatened violence in their home state in Mexico. This reminded me so keenly, so well, of the family I met 2.5 years ago on the U.S.-Mexico border, who told me that if they did not cooperate with the drug cartels in their home state, they would be killed. Casa de los Amigos supported migrants in other ways. For 5 days, we hosted the Caravan of Mothers of Missing Migrants. This group of mothers from Central America all had children who had left home in search of a better life. But these mothers, and there were, I think, 30 who stayed with us and another 20 in another location. These mothers had lost contact with their children en route, and they were now traveling the migratory routes across Mexico, searching for any information, any leads on their missing children. Some stories ended happily. We heard those stories. Some did not. We heard those stories too. And most continued to search year after year. I'm deeply proud that Casa de los Amigos hosted these mothers for 5 days when they stopped in Mexico City. One evening, the volunteers provided a special evening for the mothers. Since I don't cook, I was in charge of preparing the space and cleaning up afterwards. We bought flowers and candles for each table, and the planned part of the evening ended with music and dancing. It brought tears to my eyes to see these mothers dancing and laughing. And in cleaning up, I needed to work around a table where a mother was tearfully telling her story to a journalist. It is deeply humbling to be in the presence of mothers, so many mothers, each of whom is searching for any information on a missing child. There's one other important way that Casa de los Amigos serves migrants. While we do not provide free housing, when migrants arrived at our doors, which happened frequently, I would say daily, we warmly embraced them. We offered them water, any food that we had. We offered them clothes. We offered them a place to sit, a place to rest. And when appropriate, we referred them to shelters that could provide free or inexpensive housing for a few nights. This is actually hard for the volunteers to grasp, but it was an important lesson to know our role, that there was the migrants that we actually referred to other places, because we knew the space we had, we knew what we could offer, and we knew that we wanted to be helpful to the migrants, but we couldn't allow them to stay there free of charge. It was not our role. That was the role of another partner. What is to be learned from this aspect of my sabbatical? One of the clear lessons for me is that Casa de los Amigos learned that trying to do it all in serving refugees and migrants would soon overwhelm even the best-intentioned folks. Casa de los Amigos knew its strengths and knew where it could best serve in this important work. Casa de los Amigos narrowed its focus and knew how many it could serve effectively. We housed no more than 6 refugees at a time. In other words, we knew what we could do, and we knew what we could do well. We could not save the world, but we could make a difference in the lives we touched. There is now a worldwide refugee crisis. The lesson I bring from Casa de los Amigos is to recognize that refugees have many complex needs. Some needs can be met financially, but refugees also need a caring community that warmly welcomes them. As I told in the story for all ages, we have so much to offer in this country, and to me it is criminal if we turn our backs to those in need. I want to close with my favorite social justice story. A woman who lives in a town with a river flowing through the town discovers a person flowing down the river is in distress. And she helps the person, bringing him or her safely to shore. Then she notices others floating down the river in distress, and she helps them as well. As she notices more and more people floating down the river, she gets an idea. She decides to organize others in town to help the growing need. And she and this organization is successful for a while. But even her organized efforts are eventually not enough. And so she decides to travel upstream from her town to find out why there are so many people ending up in the river in distress. Learning this, she then works to address the systematic problems that have led to so many people floating down the river. Today, we need all three forms of aid to refugees and migrants. There is much we can do as individuals, and that includes offering a warm smile and a welcome to refugees and migrants in our communities. We can make a difference today just by how we greet people on the street. And we can support organizations that can provide aid to displaced refugees around the world. And I recommend the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which has a special appeal right now to serve the refugees in Syria. And we can also support, I would recommend, Doctors Without Borders. And for me, most important of all, we need to find real solutions to the problems that have led to the refugee and migrant crises. This will not be easy work, and it will involve political and economic solutions and political and economic will beyond the nasty rhetoric we hear today. And I would like to recommend Amnesty International as a way to support this effort. Finally, as Unitarian Universalists, as part of all three ways to make meaningful change in the refugee and immigrant crises, let us nurture our own spirits by affirming our own Unitarian Universalist principles. Let us take to heart and to hand our first principle, our commitment to and belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, no exceptions. And equally compelling is our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. May it be so.